Good evening, and welcome to The Caring View, the only online weekly free social care chat show aimed at elevating, celebrating and educating social care. You may notice that it's just myself and Jenny here tonight. Adam is out enjoying some bonfire fireworks tonight for Guy Fawkes Night, and I won't lie, when I booked this show in, it didn't even dawn on me that the 5th of November, but here we are. Before we begin tonight, I just wanted to give a shout out to some of our sponsors. So we have got Prosperwell, the UK's leading digital marketing agency. We've got Care Business Associate Training, CBAT, for those who remember Paul Blaine was very prominent in the pandemic. That's Paul's company, but you can visit them at cbaassociatetraining.co.uk. We've got Attis Care by Attis Insurance Brokers, Log My Care, the care management platform, and we have also got Florence, directly connecting healthcare professionals and organisations with shifts and also their training suite. And before I do forget and I head on to tonight's show, don't forget to head over to our website, www.thecaringview.co.uk. So tonight we are talking around stress awareness and management techniques. I'm delighted to be joined today by Jenny Stanley. Good evening, Jenny.
Good evening. It's lovely to be here. Thank you for having me.
No, thank you very much for giving up your bonfire Guy Fawkes Night for us. So, for anybody who doesn't know you, Jenny, are you able just to do some quick introductions, the company you're from, and just a bit more about you?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to. Thank you. So I'm Jenny Stanley. I am Director of Training and Education at One Stop Training, which is a new organisation. We just began in the early part of 2024. But my background, I've worked in health and social care for 32 years now, which makes me feel really, really old when I say it, but there we go. The vast majority of my career, I've worked with people who have a learning disability and the autistic community. I've done all sorts of jobs really in my time, right from being a support worker through to kind of registered manager, area manager, regional work manager, autism lead. Kind of fell into training probably about 15 years ago, and it's my passion. And I stopped practicing probably 6 or 7 years ago and worked in training full time, and I deliver a wide range of things, but having had senior management responsibilities for a really long time, and now of course being part of the leadership at One Stop, stress is a really important area to think about because it impacts our workforce, it impacts our business, and it impacts us as individuals. So it's something that I've always been really passionate about. So thank you for inviting me here to explore it a bit further.
No, thank you very much for joining. And I think one thing I love about trainers that have got care experience, even if it's frontline or whether it's as management, is that actually you can really adapt that to social care. Because I think there's a lot of people that come into social care that don't have that experience, and sometimes you sit on the training and you don't get as much as you should. And I'm really looking forward to tonight's conversation, because I think actually you just said there, you've got all those years of experience from those operational roles, and actually kind of actually what it's like day to day as a registered manager or a director of an organisation, and kind of some of those pressure points.
Yes, absolutely.
So before we begin, I just wanted to look at kind of the word stress, because I think when I was getting ready for tonight's show, I Googled what is stress, because I was having a conversation with somebody at work and they were just asking what I was doing this evening, and when I told them, and our versions of stress were very different. So I did Google it, and interestingly, there are multiple definitions. So there's the definition around the body's reaction to a challenge or a demand, but there's also the definition of a state of worry or the mental tension caused by a difficult situation. But I didn't think necessarily that's kind of, when we talk about stress, that's not the two definitions I would go to. And I don't actually know what definition I would go to if I had to think about it. But yeah, how would you define stress?
I see it as a spectrum, to be quite honest. Like many things in life, I think there are a lot of different interpretations, and you can be stressed in a way that is positive and useful and helps you to harness that energy. So I'm thinking of things like, oh my gosh, years ago, before my driving test, that stress and that anxiety is what gave me the adrenaline to get through that driving test. You know, sometimes stress can be something that we can positively harness, but only if it is for something that's quite short term. And then I think at the other end of the spectrum, we've got stress that falls over into distress, where it causes us to feel an impact that impacts us physically, it impacts us emotionally, it impacts us psychologically, maybe even spiritually. And I think we often don't think about physical stress, but I have certainly, particularly as I've got older, realised that I'm quite vulnerable to physical stress. So I really resonate with physical stress. But I definitely think it's a spectrum, and I don't think all stress is bad, which is probably quite a controversial thing to say, and it's probably the only positive reference I'm going to make to stress this evening. But let's just put that out there to say it's not always a bad thing, and we can harness it as an asset in some situations for a short period of time.
I definitely think you are right. It can spur you on. I think that comes to probably later on in our conversation around recognition and awareness and how you then utilize that to benefit yourself. Before we kind of dive into that, I wanted to look at the current kind of state within social care. So obviously as a trainee, you're meeting numerous different individuals, numerous providers, numerous types of settings, so care home, home care, supported living. What's the current state at the moment that you're kind of seeing, that you're hearing from the people that you're training and supporting?
It's a wide range. I think there's a lot of frustration, a lot of stress that is caused by frustration. And I think that's probably the thing that I see replicated over and over again. And it's not any one type of frustration, it's lots of types of frustration, but very often frustration around lack of resources for the people in receipt of care. And I think that's where I see staff really struggling, when they feel that they are unable to support the people that it's their job to support in the way that they would like to support them, because of difficulty accessing health, or inequalities in health, or not enough resources to be able to meet changing or arising needs. But I also think there is a lot of that long term, we've been short staffed forever and it's become a way of life, and the stress, it has been normalized, and I think that's quite dangerous.
No, and I think before we kind of went live tonight, we were talking around some of those pressures there with staffing, and actually how that then impacts actually the care that's being received from the individuals that we're caring for. And I think that is a vicious cycle, because actually we then don't deliver the care that we know we can deliver and want to deliver. Then we feel guilty, which in turn then spirals into, you know, something else and manifests itself. And I think for me, if you're working in an organization and you're listening either tonight live or you're on catch up and you haven't got that staffing and support, then you need to raise that. And I think one thing we spoke about, Jenny, a couple of weeks ago was actually, if you're working for an organization, you should feel like you can put your hand up and you should be able to talk freely around some of those concerns. And actually, if your organization doesn't support you with that, then you need to make that decision about what you want to do long term. Because I know for me, actually, I wouldn't want to work for an organization that isn't going to support. And you spoke there around, actually, there are some services that are struggling with recruitment and retention. And absolutely they are. But actually, what is the company doing about that to support you? Are they putting money into that recruitment? Are they investing in, obviously, the staff to prevent that retention? What are some of the things you've kind of seen that have worked well in terms of those staffing, if that's something you're hearing?
Certainly some of the things in the past that I've found to be really effective are coming alongside managers in particular who might be really struggling with staffing issues. I remember once when I was an area manager, I had a staff member he was a registered manager of quite a large service, and he was rock solid. He never complained, got his head down, got the job done. And he phoned me up one afternoon and said, Jen, I'm on my knees. I need a new senior. We're really struggling in the senior team. So I said, okay, leave it with me. And I went to a sister service just down the road, because this is quite a big company, and said to the manager, I just need to borrow one of your seniors for 3 months secondment, because that stress that I heard in his voice on that call, he needed a practical response. He didn't need to vent. He didn't need to have a long-term strategy. He needed something that was going to solve his problem next week, next day, within the next few hours, so that he could populate his rota and actually have some time off. So I think it's really important to understand the context in which people are sitting with stress. Sometimes it might be very short term. So certainly another time, I was supporting, again, another manager who had somebody who had a learning disability, who was quite young, who was at end of life. And that was because the circumstances very stressful for that staff team and that manager. So just spending the evening in that service with those staff, making people a cup of tea, being there, just chatting, just physically being present to give a little bit of support. It doesn't change anything, but I think showing your face and showing up for people is really important. I think in terms of recruitment, it's really important to look at your geography and to think about what your local competition is, because we all know that it's very easy to find jobs that are more well paid than in social care in particular. So we have to look at what is the minimum wage within your locality, because it might be that you are next door to a big organisation such as Amazon and they might pay quite well. And actually then whatever it is your organisation is offering maybe can't compete. And I think you have to be very aware of issues like that can be a real block just because of something like geography or location. And some larger organisations, in my experience, I'm not saying all, often have quite a standardised approach to things like rates of pay for staff on a certain scale. And whilst I understand equity is important, I also understand that it's important that services are resourced in a way that enables them to do the job that they're paid to do. And if you can't recruit because you can't compete, actually, how do you resolve that?
No, absolutely. And I think I've written some notes, and I think what you said there about showing up is absolutely key. I think there will be so many managers listening tonight that are stressed, have faced stress, but have picked up the phone maybe to their senior, maybe their director, or somebody within their senior team is probably likely to be above them, or an operations manager. And quite often those ops roles, regional roles, actually, they cover such a vast area. There's no chance they'd ever get there in that kind of speed that somebody needs. Or even just answering the phone. I can count, numerous times when I've needed something, picked up the phone in previous organised, there's not been any answer. And actually how that then leaves you feeling, because actually you don't have, the last thing you want to do is then go down to your team and vent about kind of your worries and pass on your stresses, because then it just creates that whole culture where the whole service is stressed and carrying everything. And I think you are right when you talk about pay. It's around actually reflecting on what you're doing as an organisation, because I know I've worked for organisations that pay minimum wage, but actually we really nurture the staff and we develop them. And actually, yeah, they might leave because of pay, but they do come back because they don't get that satisfaction of being held and heard anywhere else like they do in social care. And I don't think we shout about that enough as one of our, and it's probably hard to list it as a benefit, but I don't think we necessarily shout that actually we really do support you, whether that's work or whether that's personal life and managing that, because that's what we do, is ultimately we care, and we care for our staff and like the people that we're supporting.
I absolutely agree. And I think one of the other things that really can help resolve some of the recruitment challenges is the wider package, in terms of, okay, the finances may be quite set and there might not be a lot that you can do about those, but we can be really creative in how we make our roles inviting. And that's all about leadership style, charisma, compassion, experience, being able to be flexible, to have that combination of management and leadership skills, to be able to really be creative in the way that we create roles for people that are coming in to work with the people who use our services. And actually, if we put co-production at the heart of that, and we really lift up the voices of people using services, then we should attract the right sort of people who want to work in services where the people in receipt of care are leading the service and are just supported by the management and the team within that service. That would draw me. If I was looking to come back into care, that would be a far bigger draw than what was in my paycheck.
Absolutely. We have got a couple of comments that I'm going to go to in a minute. If there is anybody that's got any questions or any thoughts about what we're discussing tonight, please do drop them in the comments. We've spoken there around how we do it well for our staff, but I'm conscious, and I've also been there as a manager, and I advocate for this all the time, that we've got a whole pool of managers that are doing amazing work for the people that they're supporting, but above them, they don't have that. What is there that managers can do either for themselves? Obviously, if they've already asked and they're not getting that support, and I would advocate that actually there is a whole ton of jobs out there. And actually, if you're a registered manager right now, actually there are companies dying out for registered managers because they're in lack of demand. So there are companies out there that will support you. But there will be managers that are tied to their team, tied to the people they support, but don't feel like they've got the support, will be going home stressed every day. What is there that they can do? Any tips, any techniques that you know of?
I think, and this always resonates with me, and you might think that this is a bit of a strange one. Have you heard this theory about juggling balls and you decide what are the rubber balls and the glass balls? Do you know this one?
No.
I love this theory.
Hearing it.
So yeah, it talks about, when you've got lots of balls that you've got juggling in the air, and we're not talking about, 3 balls of work, family, and whatever else you've got going on. We're talking about many different things, and you're frantically trying to keep everything going. And that instead of just kind of manically trying to keep all of these balls in the air, that we just reflect on each individual ball and say, what would happen if I drop this ball? Is it a glass ball and it will smash and that will be completely gone from my life, whatever it is? And that might be, I don't know, my marriage, for example. So I need to keep that one in the air because I have to keep working at that. But actually, if I'm then thinking about the fact that, I don't know, I may be working 6 days a week, I may be doing a couple of sleep-in shifts because there's challenges there and I'm not getting us home as often, and maybe I'm undertaking other things above and beyond my role at work, are some of those elements rubber balls where if I drop them, it won't hurt my career, it will bounce back. And it might be that it won't bounce back there and then because I haven't got enough capacity to pick it up. But actually, what do I want to let go of completely? Because those balls I can just drop and they can roll away. And that might be something like, I used to be a school governor. I was really passionate about it, but actually there was a time in my life when my children were younger, it was just too much. And I had to acknowledge that it was one thing too many at that time. And I put it away, always with the intention to go back and pick it up. And did I? No, I didn't, but I could if I chose to. But I think sometimes we have to really look at how much of our life is being taken up by our job, and actually, are we staying in that job because of fear? As you say, there's a ripe market out there for goods managers, and how many of the balls that we are keeping in the air treating like glass are actually rubber? And if we left that job or we allowed some of those balls to drop, would we get an opportunity to bounce back elsewhere? And that may not be a popular concept, but I think it helps us prioritize just by saying, what would be the impact if I drop this ball? Would it be short term? Would it be long term? Would it be devastating and break? Or is there some resilience there, even if it's later on?
I really like that. And I think one thing I wrote down as you were talking is that we're all replaceable. And I know that sounds absolutely horrible. And I think I've always given 110%. And I think I kind of look back over life at about the time I've missed. And I've been married nearly 15 years, but I don't feel like I've been married 15 years, but actually how much my wife has let me just work and has kind of sacrificed like those holidays and everything else. And I also think about the time that I've missed with my own children and kind of those bits and pieces and the school runs and all those. And I think the pandemic, and we've got a question around the pandemic that I'm going to bring in a minute, but I think the pandemic really highlighted for me that actually we are a number, and actually, we drop down dead tomorrow because of poor health that we've neglected, or our relationship breaks down and you leave because actually you need to move away, or whatever the reason is. Actually, tomorrow an advert will be out, next month somebody will be in your job, and that service continues, that organization continues, but then you're left picking up the pieces from your own personal life that you've not necessarily prioritized.
Absolutely. And you know, I'm a firm advocate, Mark, of having strong boundaries. And I think that's one of the things that we're all vulnerable to in health and social care, is that we bring who we are to work. You bring your personality, your interests, your life experience. But because of that, and because we are caring people by nature, otherwise we wouldn't work in the industry, we have to be really careful that as managers, we don't end up being mums and dads and agony aunts and, you know, counsellors and bereavement coaches and all of those things that actually are well beyond the remit of our role. And to help manage your stress, in my opinion, you need to set your stall out really clearly as to what your role is and what your role isn't, so that you have the ability to be effective at what you can do, and you're not distracted by the things that actually you don't need to do, but people expect it of you because of your nature or your personality type. We do need to protect ourselves a little bit there, because I think we can be too giving.
No, absolutely. And I'm going to pop a pin in there. And I do really want to come back about setting out your stall and around employers' responsibilities and bits. I'm going to dive into the questions that are in the comments, and then we'll come back to that conversation. So Emily has said, I like the idea of stress enhances performance mindset. Our perception of stress can actually change how it affects us. I know this is something we spoke about at the beginning of the show. Are you able to talk about how actually we can turn that stress and that anxiety and that drive into actually how it can drive us forwards in our day-to-day kind of work and personal life?
Absolutely. I think I'm just seeing this image in my mind, and it's a visual that I found on Google once that talked about, you know, doing what you always did, and then outside of that is where the magic happens. And stress can help you achieve that. It can help you be brave. It can help you to think, you know what, we all get that imposter syndrome of, oh, I'm not good enough, or I won't be able to do that. But actually you are good enough and you will be able to do it. And if for any reason it's not right for you at the time, just come back to it later. I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to not fail. And actually, as a manager, one of the things I really learned quite early on is to accept that I will fail, and to talk about that and to share it with my staff team so that they feel okay about failing too. And that in itself really reduces stress, because if you stop expecting yourself to be perfect, you don't get as stressed about it. But actually, in terms of when you feel really anxious about doing something for the first time, when you're feeling really, oh gosh, am I cut out for this? Can I do it? Even if it's something like, I don't know, recruiting for the first time, and you're more nervous than the person that you're interviewing because you've never done that before. Afterwards, you think that was amazing. And look, I've really been able to select this incredible member of staff who's really added an element to my team. And that then makes you realize not only that you can do, but it drives you on, and it makes you think, well, what else can I do? And I think that is tied in quite closely with job satisfaction. If we live our safe little lives doing our little management roles, and we're never brave and we're never bold and we're never stressed, what are we really achieving? The people in our services have the right to expect us to be brave on their behalf. And that does mean harnessing stress positively, but not without the right support.
No, absolutely. And I think for me, actually, when you accept that you're stressed, and I think you've kind of, everything feels like you don't know where to start. I think for me, sometimes actually, that's when actually the juices flow. I think you end up sitting, or I definitely end up sitting there thinking, right, everything just seems to be on top of me, and I need to make and I just end up making a to-do list or 101 different post-it notes, because I have great satisfaction in screwing them up when they're done and throwing them away. But yeah, just creating a list. And then I think that helps you work out actually, where is something going wrong? What support and resources and tools do you need? And it goes back to then what we were talking about earlier. Actually, do I need to go to my manager and say, actually, this is all too much and I need X, Y, Z from you or from the company? Do I then learn to delegate and get half those tasks off to other colleagues that I work with, because actually I know that I can't? And I think then it just forms that communication, because I think once you've accepted it and you've realized actually what you then need to do to overcome it, I think then you're more likely to then go to other people and start being honest about actually the expectations and the realization of actually what you can and can't do.
Absolutely. And the other thing that I think is really helpful, I think you're very organized if you're able to go straight into a list. For me, I need to do something to get me to the point where I can sit and write a list. I need to get rid of a bit of the stress first. So the thing I've always done is I've always cleaned my office. If I don't know where to start off by making a clean space, tidy mind. and then I'm starting to think about processing things whilst I'm dusting and mopping the floor and all of those things. But I just find that I almost need a transition activity to get me into the point where I feel calm enough to write the list. And I recognise that in myself now. So I know that if when I was feeling overwhelmed, I tried to sit and do the list straight away, I'd probably cry. But actually, if I could do something simple that isn't stressful to just kind of get me in that starting to think about it without really focusing on it because I'm busy cleaning, it just helps me kind of align my thoughts. And by the time I sit down, actually mentally, the list's already half done.
No, absolutely. And I think there's something in what you were just saying there around that. And I think actually taking 5, 10, 20 minutes, whatever you need outside of work as a break. And I think all of us that work in social care, none of us, whether you're a support worker, whether you're a domestic staff, a manager, nobody ever seems to have their allocated break times. So actually, why not just take an hour if you need an hour out of your day, as long as it's authorised? Don't want to go out there just setting everybody up to fail. But actually, the time that you need to then come back in with a fresh mind. And one thing I find is all of the jobs I've ever had have never been just down the road from where I live. And actually, I find that driving time a great time for thinking. I spend more time thinking about actually what do I need to do. And I think actually if I'm stressed, if I'm say working at home in the morning and I need to go to the office, and I find that drive to an office, because mine are about an hour away. Actually, by the time I get there, I've thought about everything I need to do, a bit like what you were saying, then you can start breaking it down.
Yes. I think it's really healthy to do one thing while you're thinking about something else, because it's not as impactful, because you're just kind of doing it almost on a subconscious level. So you're not putting yourself under the same level of stress. And I think it's just it eases you into it instead of, right, I'm going to force myself to sit down and really start planning. That can be quite hard if you feel that you don't know where to start. So easing into it with a transition activity, I always think is really helpful.
And if you're doing some cleaning, it knocks one of the jobs off the list for the weekend.
Exactly.
Okay, the next one is a bit more of a meaty question. So this has come from Tina. Do you believe that post-traumatic stress disorder is now in care, especially post-COVID? I believe in my work with clients, care staff are still suffering with after COVID years where they have been left without support and recognition, let alone recovery. What are your thoughts on this one?
Do you know, I'm not sure that we will ever really recover from the things that we saw and the things that we witnessed during COVID. Certainly vicarious trauma, absolutely. Maybe complex PTSD as a result of those, day after day, seeing those same problems and maybe feeling so isolated on top of that. I'm no expert in PTSD, so it's very difficult to comment, but certainly I would expect that there are still staff who are very traumatized by that. And actually, we probably have a responsibility to address that, because we are quite a long time after COVID now. We are back to normal. You and I were talking about this the other day, Mark, saying we can't keep talking about COVID as if it's still present, because it isn't. We do need to kind of say, okay, let's move on from that. Obviously, I know it's still here, but I mean in the same way that it was during lockdown and the pandemic. But I do think that those lingering effects, they need to be addressed, because if we're still seeing them, that's not going to change unless there's the right support.
And I think COVID especially, it's like a one-off. And I know for me, like I obviously left my family. I definitely have something, like even when I saw that comment popped in, like it triggered me. And I don't know, any mention of COVID does. And I feel like I kind of lost a year of time with family and my kids and my wife. But I've had that support and I've talked about it with professionals and gone through that, but it still is there. And I think you are right. I don't think that's ever going to leave us because of what we went through. And I think it's still, even though we're like 3-4 years down the line, it still feels like it was yesterday, because it's still all over the media talking about a new case, a rise in it. They still talk about the jab, and I think one country's just banned the jab because of something. No sooner have you thought, actually, that's it, it's then back in front of you, either on your social media or on the news. And I think it just brings all of it back up. But Yeah, I think as an organisation, and we'll come to about organisation responsibilities in a bit, actually you do have a duty of care to know kind of what your staff stress points are. And actually it might be that they didn't even work for you during the pandemic, but actually if that's something that affects them, you should definitely know about it to be able to then support them through it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. On the plus side, I think staff that worked through the pandemic will have resilience and skills like no other staff will ever have. So I do think, and I'm not saying there's a plus side, but really what else can life throw at you once you've worked through the front line in the pandemic? It really is an amazing skill set, and people like me that didn't work frontline during the pandemic will never have those skills. So I do think that for people who probably are still very traumatized by what they saw, the thing to maybe hold on to is, first of all, how brave and amazing the work was that was done. But secondly, the skills that were developed in terms of being dynamic and being responsive and being compassionate and being bold and just that pure grit of sticking on. There's a lot of people that didn't.
No, absolutely. And I think when I talk to managers that have been through the pandemic managing and are now worried about something or stressed about, I take them right back to that, because I think actually if you managed through the pandemic when the regulator disappeared, your local authority likely disappeared, your company probably likely disappeared, actually it was just you and your team, actually you can get through that. You can get through whatever else is happening, that your roof's fallen in or the CQC have just turned up at your door and they're not being great and supportive. Because actually those things are all minor in comparison to 3-4 years ago through what you actually went through and dealt with. So, and I think sometimes that reflection, because we work in such a fast-paced sector, I think sometimes you don't think about actually where you've been or the journey you've been on. You're just kind of in the here and now and the current.
And I think we tend to be, as people, not good at acknowledging our own skills. And I think it's probably, as you say, very difficult for people not to feel triggered by that and to really acknowledge that you've really grown and developed a skill set that is unique as a result of it, is probably something that a lot of people haven't really thought about, but it's true. So there are things that come as well, alongside the trauma. There are the skills and the development and the resilience.
And I guess it's what we were talking about earlier, actually, how you harness what you've been through and what you're coping with, and then turning that into a positive out the other end.
Yes, absolutely. Or even just learning, well, I won't do that again. That's still learning, isn't it? It's still something that you can take forward. I think failure is just as important in terms of learning as success.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So Paula has said there are external types of support. It's always worth asking your provider if they will budget for that support before just leaving. Sometimes providers and owners are blind to their registered managers' needs. This is something we were obviously talking about earlier, and I think a great reminder there, Paula, that actually before you do up sticks, you do definitely need to be raising what you're going through, the support you need, so that actually your organisation has a chance of doing something. But I also think utilise, if you are leaving, things like exit interviews. Nothing might change, but at least you've given that feedback on actually why it hasn't worked for you and how they could implement something in the future. But yeah, I think there's probably a lot of directors, senior teams, organisations that might not necessarily know how their staff actually feel.
I think in addition to that, often there can be a lot of fear around, well, I'm just going to assume that everybody is stressed because it's more likely the person's stressed than they're not. But actually people don't know what to do. So we'll just do nothing and hope that that person keeps quiet and cracks on because we don't know what to do. So I would definitely encourage, particularly managers who are feeling really stressed, don't just ask for help, but go and say what you need. Go and say what you want. You know exactly where your biggest stress points are, and your line manager's perception of what is stressing you might be very different to the reality of what is stressing you. So think about what it is that you need and don't be frightened to ask for it. It might be that it isn't achievable, but then at least you'll know you asked.
No, absolutely. And I know I've definitely spoken to you about this before, around actually a lot of the senior team, I quite often speak about leadership and management. And I think as registered managers, we're definitely in that kind of leadership boat, so to speak, in terms of nurturing, being there alongside our staff, jumping in when's needed, and being one of the team. I think sometimes, a lot of the time, actually, the registered manager, the next person above them is the director or the owner. And actually, they're in a very different mind space in terms of the business than they are. And actually, they're more in a management role in terms of this is the business plan, this is how we're going to get there, and then they almost become a bit more dictative in their kind of stance and leadership style. And actually, I think sometimes that human element gets forgotten because they're so heavy in the business. Whereas actually, like Paula has said, actually, if you remind them of actually what support you need and how you need that, and sometimes I think it is you need to give them actually how they need to do that to support you, because I think, like you just said, actually they might not realize, or it's not natural for some people to even talk about supporting one another still.
Absolutely, absolutely. Often I think people are very frightened of having the feelings conversation, because open the can, worms everywhere, nobody knows what to do about the worms. It's people often don't feel that they have the skills to have those conversations, but hiding from a problem isn't going to make it go away. So if you don't feel you have the skills, let's find out who has got the skills and connect and work in partnership.
Absolutely, collaboration is key. So Emily has said, it's so important to prioritize our well-being. I think it's valuable to start breaking down what I like to call the work-life. I'm not going to pretend I can say that word, especially for those of us who are passionate about our work. There's way more than just these two elements in life. Just because everyone is very stressed doesn't mean that being very stressed is okay. Absolutely. And I think work life was one of the things I wanted to speak to you about, because I think we hear about work-life balance. I like to call it life-work balance. I like to flip it on the head, because I always feel like we should put life first, and I don't necessarily do it well myself, but I like to preach to everybody else that we should have a good life-work balance. Is there ever such a thing as a work life or a life-work balance? Because I know I've definitely fallen, like I write about it all the time and I kind of talk about it all the time. But actually, I think we just set ourselves up to believe that there's this amazing place that you have in your life that is this 50% work, 50%. And I don't think any of us, just because of the way we are as a society, unless you're fortunate enough not to work, I don't think we ever really get that balance and that true harmony of what I feel like it's just that we're all taken down a garden path on a false pretense that this is what we're going to get. What are your thoughts around work-life balance? I don't feel like I worded that very well. I feel like I kind of went off on a tangent then.
I totally got there. It was very clear. It's great. It's a really interesting one, because I don't see it as a static thing. I don't think it's something you either have or you don't have. I think there will be days, weeks, months where I either have it or don't have it, and it's ever fluctuating depending on what's going on at home, what's going on at work, what the opportunities arising. I think even now in training, one of the reasons we started One Stop was so that we had control, and I had complete control over my work-life balance. Have I done it successfully? Not a chance. But I do think what I've noticed is to take the opportunities to spend more time in the life area when I have the opportunity to, instead of saying, oh, good, it's just opportunity to add 20 more things to my to-do list, which is my nature and is probably the nature of every social care manager, is if you ever start to make progress into your to-do list, you just think, well, what else can I add on there? Instead of saying, I've achieved that, now I'm going to take a bit of time out or have a rest. I think we tend to be people that go, great, what else can I add? And we put ourselves under stress. And one of the things that I'm still trying to learn to do, but I'm definitely getting better at, is by saying, what will happen if I don't meet that deadline? If I don't apply for that tender, is it going to be the end of the world? And I've started to say, I'm just going to push that back and give myself permission to do that, instead of following my instinct, which is to heap as much as stress as possible on myself. And then, of course, there's never any work-life balance. So I often find, for example, things that really help me is if I want to do a piece of work, I will not do it in working hours, because as soon as I'm online, everybody can see I'm online and wants a piece of me. So I might see it on a Sunday afternoon if I've got a specific piece of work to do, when it's quiet and I can get my head down for a couple of hours, because I won't have Teams ringing, I won't have my emails pinging, and just that lack of distractions helps me to be really effective in that time. But then it might be that on a Tuesday, well, I might say, okay, I've got no meetings this morning, I'll take a morning off, because I can take that life bit back during work time, because I have that flexibility. And I think in a post-COVID world, a lot of us have that flexibility. We need to move away from this life happens outside of the office. It doesn't necessarily need to. Sometimes you might take some time to work at home, and it might be that you do a day at home at the weekend and you take a day off during the week because your deputy's there. So a bit of flex.
Yeah, I used to love working at the weekend. I find that working a 9 to 5 is worse than working shifts. And I know that won't suit everybody, but I find that come the weekend, everybody else isn't working. It's 101 things that you've got to do. I go into town and it's absolutely heaving. And yeah, actually the days I used to go in on a Tuesday, Wednesday or Thursday or something, actually it would be dead and you get so much more done with your time.
Yes.
I think there's just kind of from my perspective is around what we've spoken about already around reflection. And I spoke earlier around actually that I don't feel like I've got a good work-life balance. But actually when I compare where I was maybe 4 years ago, my work-life balance is 100 times better than it was back then. But actually, I know that I can still do more. And I think actually, if there's anybody listening tonight thinking, actually, I don't have a great work-life balance, think where you've come from. And if you haven't already come from somewhere, how can you do that? And I think you just spoke there about actually, can you work from home to get your to-do list done? Can you work different days? I think I'm going to sound like the biggest hypocrite here, but preach what you say to your staff. Actually, if you're telling your staff to make sure they take their lunch break every day, you should also do that yourself. And I think I've got a fairly new registered manager that I'm line managing. And actually, before she was in that role, used to take a lunch break every day to go home, walk her dog. But actually reinforcing that actually you should keep that in your calendar, because that's something that you've always done. It's good for your mental health, because actually you get out of the office, it's time to think, outside with nature. And actually not just because you've come into a new role that you've got to lose all the boundaries that you've got. It's like I'm definitely not a morning person. Like I block out from 9 o'clock till 10 o'clock to do my emails and my kind of stakeholder management bits and pieces early in the morning. It's all via email, because actually I know for me that's a lot better. But actually move all the in-person in meetings and bits and pieces to the afternoon when I know I'm a lot more awake and a lot more active and alive. But I think it's just knowing yourself and sticking to those. And I think it's okay to say no. I know that in the past I've had, when I've worked in companies, I've put like an hour in for like a lunch break, not every day, but just some of the days. But it's always the first time that somebody books in a meeting. And actually it's okay to hit, actually, no, you're not going to that meeting, because actually you've already got that in there for yourself, because you're not going to book that meeting and then move your lunch break because there's probably something else already in there. I think we have to work out what works for us and then be strong in actually standing up for that. But I do definitely think that if you've got that from above and it's feeding down, it's a lot easier then to embrace that, rather than if it's just yourself and then maybe the team underneath you that, you've got to manage all of those different kind of levers that you're pulling.
Absolutely. I think it's really good to know what your strengths are and what your areas that you're still developing are. And if the areas you're still developing are your boundaries, your expectations of yourself, we're so hard on ourselves as individuals. If we spoke to ourselves in our inner voice in the same way that we spoke to our friends, we would be a lot kinder to ourselves.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it's okay in admitting that if you don't know something, they're just listening to you talking about your strengths and weaknesses. And I'm the first to talk about kind of like my own, like finances are not my forte in life. I don't think they'll ever be my forte in my life. But actually, I know I've got team members around me and it is their skill. And actually, it's okay to admit that that's not your skill and that you're relying on colleagues in regardless of what role you're in. And I think sometimes, I know if I was not like that, I'd actually really struggle on a day-to-day basis, because a lot of my role is around budgets and finances and managing that. And actually, it's nice to know that you've got somebody to lean on, because you've been open and honest about what your strengths and weaknesses are.
And that really helps you to manage stress, doesn't it? Because then you can delegate effectively. And I think it's really positive to say, that's not my area. I'm not great in that area, but I don't need to be, because you don't have to be the oracle just because you're a manager or a senior manager. It's fine to say, you know, that's the purpose of team, right? Is you don't have to be a one-man band. And I think one of the dangers, and I definitely did this when I was a registered manager on more than one occasion, I made myself the person who was responsible for everything, and my delegation was very small. And that often came from, you know, inheriting staff teams that weren't very well trained or very resilient. And you start off with, okay, I need to lead by example in everything. But actually, at some point, you've got to start handing back some of that responsibility. Otherwise, you end up doing it all yourself and you burn out and you leave. And I certainly did that several times before I realised that that had become a habit, and I needed to consciously step away from that and really learn to delegate and use the skills of the people around me, because not only was I not doing myself any favours, I wasn't giving my team members any opportunity to develop new skills, to spread their wings, because I was just cracking on and doing it all, and it didn't help anybody. But it took me a long time to learn that lesson, which sounds crazy now, but I think you can get very locked into things that you're used to doing.
Oh, absolutely. And I don't think that's uncommon. I think it's definitely happened to me. I think because you want to know everything's done to the standard that you would do, but it's impossible to do that 7 days a week. There's always going to be a time when you're not in that business, whether it's a day off, whether you're on annual leave, whether you're on sick leave, or whatever it is, and you're going to have to let go. And I think we now have the beauty of technology that can actually support us in those roles. So actually let people do those audits, because you can check that remotely, or it can flag any actions to you, and then you can monitor what's happening with those actions. I think actually technology scares a lot of people, but I actually think if we embrace it in social care, actually it could do a world of good to so many people.
Yes, absolutely. I think technology is hugely helpful. I think the potential downside is that you can almost be available 24/7 via your Teams and your emails. And I think we all remember during COVID, when working from home, we had to start saying, okay, at what point am I going to shut the laptop instead of being available 24/7? And I think maybe that tech culture of constantly being open, that's something I've had to consciously try to be less available and take time away.
Absolutely. And I know if Adam was here tonight, he would share I just plug in my laptop and then I'm working, and I'm not advocating anybody does that. But Adam will, if he is going to turn on his laptop, he won't plug it in. He'll turn it on and he'll work until the laptop dies. And then when the laptop dies, that's it, actually, time's up. I mean, the problem I have is I did that. My laptop would probably last for about 5 minutes, and so I'd get nothing done. By the time I'd logged in, it'd be logging itself out. But no, I really like that. And actually, what I say to my team now, off the back of Adam telling me that, is if you want to turn your laptop on, do this. Don't plug in knowing that actually the laptops don't last very long. So actually, you might get half hour of work done, but actually that's it. You've drawn the line, and that's one of those boundaries and commitments that you make to yourself, that you won't plug it in.
Absolutely. Just the simple thing of putting my work emails on mute on my phone changed my life, which just seems ridiculous. But I just felt that when I was out with the family, I didn't have work constantly tapping me on the shoulder going, oh, Jen, can you look at this? Just making sure that I didn't look at them until it suited me to look at them. And that probably would be in the evening after dinner was done and all the rest of the things. But I don't mind giving an hour or two then, because I can do it. I manage the work instead of the work managing me. And that's the difference, isn't it? Little things like that I find really helpful.
Absolutely. It's a bit like, I try not to use WhatsApp at work just because I think it invades your personal life. And I think there's so many tools out there like Slack, and Slack's the main one that we use, or Blink, that actually can replace those, so you still have that work-life balance.
Yes. And that's really good that you're sensitive to that, Mark. And I'm sure your managers are really grateful, because, of course, we all use WhatsApp in our private life, and you don't want to keep seeing, even if you mute it, you can see the messages, can't you?
Well, I just found that I went from, and not so much in the company I'm in now, but definitely the company I came from, I found that actually I was checking my phone for WhatsApp a lot less. So then I was missing family or friends' messages just because I didn't want to pick it up, because I knew actually I had so many notifications from work and colleagues and bits and pieces that you just end up switching off of it. And I think if we're talking about kind of that work life, balance actually is essential that we do. And I think with Labour, they're talking about not contacting people outside of work. Actually, yes. I don't know how WhatsApp groups will play into that, because technically, if that's on a personal device, you're contacting them outside of work. So that's going to be very interesting to kind of see. But that's a conversation for another day.
Indeed, but it is an important conversation.
It really is. In terms of, we spoke earlier, and I said I wanted to come back to it, the organisational role in supporting staff. Does the organisation, are they responsible? Should we have a policy around well-being? Should we have a policy around stress management? Where does the responsibility of the individual lie? And where does it kind of, that grey area into the employees' and the organisation's responsibility start?
Well, personally, again, just my opinion, so may not be the opinion of others. I believe that all good leadership starts at the top. And if you have an organisation who prioritises and recognises well-being, who invests in staff, who actively celebrates growth and achievement, no matter how big or how small, I think that naturally then filters down to service level. I think organisations do have a responsibility. And I remember quite a long time ago now, when there almost became, the business case for stress management, because it would drive down your sickness figures, for example. And then all of a sudden it became a really good thing to kind of proactively have mindfulness training and all of these things. But it needs to be supported by policies, procedures, structures and frameworks that actually enable that to be lived out in the day-to-day hustle and bustle of health and social care, as opposed to a set of values that are written on the wall but aren't able to be implemented because of the lack of resources or because of the huge expectations. I think the individual does have some responsibility. I don't think it's fair or right to say that it's all on the organisation. I like to look at everything in terms of organisational level, service level and frontline individual level. And I think that's very helpful to mapping that to policies, procedures, systems and structures. I've done quite a lot of sort of firefighting roles in my career, where I've gone into services where things are in chaos and falling apart. And two of the things that have been missing every time are team meetings and supervisions. And actually, they are such good tools if used properly. And you can really take the temperature of your staff team by how the culture is at the team meeting, by just investing a little bit of time in each supervision to not work with your staff member, but just to be a person with another person, just for 10 minutes before you start the supervision. And you might then say, okay, should we formalise some of this discussion? But just that, how are you? You look exhausted, or actually you've just had a weekend off and you look much better for it. Just that general chat of, your kids were ill last week. Are they better this week? Showing a bit of interest, knowing your staff, knowing who their families are, knowing what's important to them, making sure that people have the opportunity to do things they enjoy at work. I think one of the things that is a real problem is if you are a good member of staff and you are reliable and you are skilled and you are experienced, if there are challenges in your service, you are probably going to take more than your fair share of perhaps the more difficult tasks. And that is the surefire way to burn out and lose your best staff members. So whilst you're busy trying to recruit and trying to deal with the staff that are maybe not as proactive as we would like, spend just as much time looking after, recognising, supporting, valuing, growing, and giving the staff that really are the day-to-day running of your service, really investing in them, just by making sure they have opportunities to do some of the nice things and not all of the difficult things all the time, because I think they are habits we can get into that really impact on staff well-being. And we need to be mindful of that as managers, as seniors, but as directors and as business owners, we do have a responsibility, and stress does cause physical and mental health problems. And we need to be accountable for the damage that happens to people when they're exposed to long-term chronic stress.
Thank you very much. And I've, off the back of that, listening there, I've a few things. One was around that you talked about supervisions, and it reminded me that we had a really great conversation number of weeks ago around how to revolutionize your supervision, because I do think they've generally become a tick box exercise, but well-being did come up in that conversation around that. So I'm going to share the links to that. But also when I was just Googling, because I see a lot more people talking about stress risk assessments, which I've only ever worked for one company that do stress risk assessments, but I am seeing them kind of mentioned a lot more. When I typed it in, actually, the Health and Safety of England website came up, but also the CQC mentioned stress risk assessment. So actually it's a lot more prominent and probably a lot more key to our roles than actually maybe we're aware of. And I think sometimes, I mean, I didn't realise it was on the HSE website actually around managing stress and how to do it, because it's not something that we're necessarily signpost all the time to. But it's definitely seen a lot more people talking about doing them, which is good.
Definitely, because it gives that accountability, doesn't it? If you do a risk assessment with your staff member about their stress, you then have to put mitigators into place and you have to act on those. And I think that's often why we have a culture in social care where we do shy away from those, because there is not only a duty to then respond, but there is a financial implication there.
No, absolutely. And I think somebody has put that in the comments around the.
Oh, really?
No, they've put definitely worth investing in well-being of our staff. Happy team equals happy service user, and that's right. Staff retention is key. Somebody else has, and I have to apologise that I've missed this one. But one of the lessons learned post-COVID is how essential adult social care workers, regardless of pay grade, are. At that point, I thought fair pay would be considered. We're left to see if this will happen in the future. Definitely think we need some fair pay for our frontline operational teams. And yes. I know there is, if I can find it again, I saw it on social media this morning, a petition to government around fair pay for care workers again. So I'll share that.
Do you know the other thing that I think would really help if it was recognised as, almost made as a profession? We are recognised as professionals, because I always feel that social care has been the sort of ugly sister to health, and it's never had the same level of gravitas. And I think the pandemic really opened people's eyes to what a skilled job it is to be a person who's delivering care to anybody, no matter how simple or complex their needs are. And I think to talk about that as unskilled work is really offensive. And it's about time that we started to formalise the professional side of care to make people feel a bit of dignity in their work, perhaps.
No, absolutely. And I know in the new year we're going to have NACAS, the National Association of Care and Support Workers, because they've got the voluntary care register at the moment, and their aim is to elevate actually that professionalism of a care worker. And I know that the Care Workers Charity also are very closely involved in doing that as well. And I think definitely anything we can do to kind of elevate that role, we should all be doing within the sector. And again, it will help with the recruitment and retention, which is obviously one of the biggest stresses for the sector.
Absolutely.
Very conscious of time. Got a whole list of things that I wanted to talk to you about. But I think one thing that stands out for me is around mental health action plans, because it's a bit like the stress risk assessment, something that I'm seeing more and more spoken about, but also more and more questions about what should people include. Have you got any experience in mental health action plans, and kind of any advice for anybody going down that route?
I've done the wellness action plans, but not specifically around mental health. I think I would be very cautious about stepping beyond my knowledge if I were asked to complete one of those. And I think it would be a really good time to say, let me collaborate with somebody that was more senior to me or somebody that was more experienced. I do think I would need to be trained to do that. If my line manager said to me, oh, Jenny, we're just rolling this out, can you knock one up? I think I would be very reluctant to do that without making sure that I've got the skills and the knowledge to do it safely, because we're not all mental health professionals and we need to make sure that what we're doing is correct. So I think probably my first thing to say would be to make sure that people are trained, confident and competent in undertaking those.
No, thank you very much. And a bit like you, I don't have much experience of completing them. I do know that Mind have a great resource, because I see that one shared probably the most often. I'll find it and pop it in the comments. The other one is the NHS also have a really good website that I came across called Better Health, Every Mind Matters. And it just talks about dealing with stress, and it's got loads of tips and links and resources. But one thing I like is it's got an amazing infographic. And I think they teamed up with, for anybody that might have seen her on LinkedIn or over on X, is Sonia Sparkles, who does some infographics, just because I recognise some of the layout. But what they've also got is a free mind plan. So it's just 5 questions that you pop it, and they're literally, tick box questions. And then it gives you, actually practical tips to help with what you've inputted. So I'll share that as well. Just because I clicked through it earlier, and I thought actually it was a really good resource that's free to access. So it doesn't cost the earth. I think that's the key, isn't it? There might not be the funds in your organisation to do loads, but actually there are some free initiatives that could change actually for us, support somebody within our team. Somebody's put about having a mental health first aider. Absolutely. And I think this is something that social care has definitely invested a lot more time and money into. And I know definitely my organisation has a number of mental health first aiders.
Absolutely. And just having people available, it gives you another resource, doesn't it? It's great.
No, absolutely. And Emily has just put, what sort of things are included in a wellness action plan? Emily, I'll dig out the link in a minute and I'll pop it in the comments to the Mind one, just because it talks you through it and it's set out nicely from what I've seen. Well, go on, Jenny.
I was just going to say, I think that there's scope within it that you can keep it fairly simple or you can elaborate on it. I think it's quite a flexible document.
Yeah, no, I was going to say it's not an onerous thing. I think sometimes with some of these things, they just become so onerous that you don't want to do it. And I think I've just found it's like 3 pages long, but it's not 3 long pages. There's like 2 or 3 boxes per page. But I'll share that into the comments. We've hit the hour mark.
That went so
fast. I always
like
to finish. It does go. I told you it'd go fast. I always like to leave on one tip that people could go away and implement. If you could give them one word of wisdom, what would be one thing that you would advise people today that they could just go out and do tomorrow?
Well, I'm just having a little look. I've got lots of things on my list. I'm just trying to, the thing that I would probably say is just invest in your staff. They're your biggest assets or your biggest liability, and they deserve to be supported with whatever you have to give them in terms of your time, your resources, your talent, your experience, your physical support, your, making work fun again. There needs to be a lot of humour in health and social care because it's a difficult industry to work in. So don't forget why you came in, and don't forget to have fun, because as somebody put in the chat, happy staff means happy people receiving support. And that's really what it's all about. Sorry, that probably wasn't as dynamic as you'd have liked it to be.
And I think for me, my closing words of wisdom would be that actually we're all doing a fantastic job. And I think sometimes, I know I said it earlier, we live in this fast-paced world, definitely in social care. And I think sometimes we forget the impact that we're making either to the teams that we're supporting right now or to the people that we're supporting. And I think sometimes we get hung up if actually we don't feel like we're being heard and we don't feel like we're being supported. But actually reverse that and look at actually the impact that you're making on other people, because actually that will give you some satisfaction. But I definitely think one thing you can go away tomorrow and do is actually make a list of the things that you need support with, and then go to your manager, whoever that is within the organisation, and be honest around actually what are your stress points, what support do you need, what tools do you need, what resources do you need. And at least then you've put it in writing, you've spoken to them, and there's not much more you can do. And then actually off the back of that, you can see the support they're either going to give you or not going to give you. And then you can make that decision from there about what your next step is going to be.
That's really good advice. And let's just not say, well, this is just where it is. It'll be the same in all organisations, because it won't. That's not necessarily true. We don't have to sit with very high levels of stress for months and months on end, because it's dangerous.
No, absolutely. So, Jenny, thank you very much for giving up your evening tonight.
Thank you for having me.
I've really enjoyed tonight's conversation, and I've made loads of notes, and I think it's been great to talk to you. And I hope that people listening tonight or people on catch up actually it's just food for thought. And I think there's definitely things that I've written down that actually I've let slip in terms of my own work-life balance, and things that we've spoken about that I think actually tomorrow I'm going to go back and make sure that I do some of these things. So yeah, no, thank you very much for joining.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate your time.
Before I close out, just want to give a shout out to our sponsors again. So we have got Prosperwell, the digital marketing agency, Care Business Associate Training, Attis Care by Attis Insurance, Log My Care, and Florence. I want to just say thank you very much for all of you that have joined us this evening, given up your fireworks evening, 5th of November, to come and listen to us talk about stress awareness and stress management techniques. And Jenny, once again, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.